Hello, I'm Brian Farrell, and welcome to PACE IT session on interface connections. Today we're going to be talking about internal interface connections, external interface connections, and finally some other optional interface connections that you should know about. And with that, let's go ahead and begin this session. So let's start this session with internal interface connections. Now, before I dive into this, I should mention that an interface is a connection point. It not only involves that connection point, but it also quite often involves the cable that goes with it. And with that, let's begin with the first internal connection, and that would be the IDE. That is the Integrated Drive Electronics Interface. It used a 40-pin, 40-wire ribbon cable that could be up to 18 inches long, and it had 3 connections on it. 1 to connect to the motherboard and 2 for peripheral devices. The ends of the connectors were keyed so that they could only be inserted one way. Now the IDE had a maximum transfer rate of 8.3 megabytes per second. IDE is closely associated with the Parallel Advanced Technology Attachment Standard, the PATA standard. Well, we found out that IDE just wasn't quite enough, so they came up with EIDE, the Enhanced Integrated Drive Electronics Interface. It used the same 40-pin connection that the IDE used, but it used an 80-wire ribbon cable. But it had the same physical dimensions as the IDE cable. Now, EIDE could achieve transfer rates of up to 167 megabytes per second. Man, that was a whole lot faster. EIDE is also backwards compatible with IDE. So now let's move on to SATA, Serial Advanced Technology Attachment. Now this is the interface that is replacing the IDE, EIDE interface in today's motherboards. It uses a 7-wire, 7-pin cable that has an L shape. Now that L shape means that it's a keyed connector and it can only be installed one way. Now this cable can be up to 1 meter in length. Now unlike the IDE and EIDE interface, only one SATA device is allowed per cable, but all SATA devices are hot swappable. That's of questionable value if your hard drive is a SATA hard drive and it's inside the case. Now SATA comes in 3 versions. There's SATA 1. It has a maximum transfer rate of 1.5 gigabits per second. Then there's SATA 2, and it has a maximum transfer rate of 3.0 gigabits per second. Then there's SATA 3, which has a maximum transfer rate of 6 gigabits per second. The other interface that you should be aware of is the eSATA, external SATA. Now this brings the high speed of the SATA interface outside of the computer case. Now it allows for a 2-meter long cable, and it can perform at SATA 3 level. Now that we're done with the internal interface connections, let's move on to the external interface connections. And we're going to begin with what's probably the most popular one, USB. The Universal Serial Bus Interface was introduced in 1998 and has been through several changes since it came out. The USB standard allows for chaining multiple devices together. You can chain up to 127 devices plus the controller. Now the USB interface can not only provide a data bus, but it can also provide power to run small devices. Now USB version 1.1 and USB 2.0 have a maximum cable length of 5 meters. But USB 3.0 does not have a maximum cable length as long as the cable meets the electrical specifications. All USB standards are backwards compatible. Now let's talk about their speed. Now USB 1.1 has a maximum transfer rate of 12 megabits per second. USB 2.0 was a vast improvement. It had a maximum transfer rate of 480 megabits per second. And then we jump up to USB 3.0. Now this has a theoretical maximum transfer rate of 5 gigabits per second. For USB 1.1 and 2.0, the standard calls for different types of physical connectors. They can be broken out into A connectors and B connectors, with each having a mini and micro version. USB 3.0 has its own standard for the connector. And these are usually colored blue so that you know that they're a USB 3.0. Now let's move on to FireWire. Now the interface and standard were developed by Apple and introduced in 1999, and it has also been through several iterations. The FireWire connection was standardized by the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, the IEEE, as the IEEE 1394 standard. The standard allows for up to 16 devices to be chained together. The maximum allowable cable length is 4.5 meters. All the standards of IEEE 1394 are backwards compatible. There are two main standards. There's FireWire 400, which has a maximum transfer rate of 400 megabits per second. And then there's FireWire 800, which has a maximum transfer rate of 800 megabits per second. Moving on, we have the serial and parallel interface. These are the legacy standard for external peripheral devices. Most PCs no longer come equipped with these interface connections, having been replaced by the more versatile USB instead. Then there are the standard interfaces for connecting to external monitors. There's the VGA, DVI, and HDMI. That's the video graphics array, the digital video interface, and the high-density media interface. What is present on your PC will depend upon the graphics capability of that PC. Then there are RJ45s and RJ11s. These are the interface standard for twisted pair wires. Ethernet networking heavily relies upon the RJ45 interface, while the RJ11 is used with plain old telephone service, POTS. So now let's move on to other interface connections. These are non-wired interfaces. And we're going to begin with infrared. Now this is a line of sight interface only. The devices must be in visual range of each other. Now it uses the infrared band of light to communicate between devices. And it had a distance limitation of approximately 3 feet. And by today's standards, it was fairly slow. It's not very common anymore. And then we have radio frequency, RF. Now this encompasses various standards that involve communicating via radio waves. Your distance is limited by the power of the transmitting device. And your speed is limited by the standards that are employed. I'm not really going to get into that now. We'll get into that when we talk about wireless networking. Then we have Bluetooth. Now this is a low-powered personal area network standard, a PAN standard, for creating a radio frequency connection. It operates on the 2.4 gigahertz radio frequency. It has an effective range of 10 meters, but the transfer rate drops as the distance between devices increases. Now that concludes this session on interface connections. We talked about some internal interface connections, some external interface connections, and some other interface connections that weren't wired. Now, on behalf of PACE IT, thank you for watching this session, and I'm sure I'll do another one soon.